disciplinary practices in a College Board course. Basically, they are the exam skills you will need to succeed on your AP exam. In this video, I'm going to be taking you through the 5 disciplinary practices that you will need to develop to do well on the AP Comparative Government and Politics exam. The first disciplinary practice is concept application. Now, as the term would imply, you are applying political concepts and processes within authentic contexts. And with authentic context, we mean the context of the 6 course countries that we study in this course: the UK, Russia, China, Iran, Mexico, and Nigeria. So not only do you need to be able to describe the concepts that you learn, the political systems, principles, institutions, policies, but you also need to be able to explain what these are and how they work. So why, for example, a certain policy or principle might be considered more democratic or authoritarian. When you have a task verb explain, you often are using because. So you say this concept fits this regime type or whatever the prompt may be because so and so. You will also then often be asked to learn to compare the different political systems and institutions and policies that you are learning about. We have 6 different countries that have certain similarities, so sometimes you might be able to point out similarities, but also many differences in their political institutions and processes and culture. So compare is also an important part of concept application. Can you show me that you understand how the concepts can be applied similarly in these countries, but also sometimes work differently in different contexts? You might also be asked to simply describe how a concept works in one specific country and explaining how that tells us more about the country that the question is about. So that is concept application as the first disciplinary practice that you will be asked to master. The concepts are the core of our course content. So you will be learning all of these concepts, and then we will apply them to the 6 course countries. So this is definitely the most basic skill, and that leads us to the second disciplinary practice, which is related to the concept application, because there we already had to compare. But country comparison will be the type of question that really asks you to compare political concepts and processes among these 6 countries. So, for example, you might have a question telling you to compare 2 or maybe 3 countries based on their political systems, institutions, and behaviors. So it really is about being able to identify the similarities and differences in these countries and then explaining the implications of any similarities or differences in these countries. So explaining why they are similar, but also explaining what that means for the political system and institutions in a given country. So here you are going a step further by not just comparing and explaining similarities and differences, but also the implications of those for our 6 course countries. The third of these disciplinary practices is, according to my students from last year, the most difficult, the data analysis. That was one that students kept on wanting to practice because they found it to be challenging. Here you will analyze and interpret quantitative data. So not qualitative data. Quantitative means numbers. And that could be a table, a chart, a graph, a map, or even an infographic. And in the most basic case, you'll be asked to simply describe the data presented. And that is quite doable, but you really, again, need to pay attention to what you are being asked, because sometimes you might be asked to describe the data, but in other cases, you might be able to asked to describe a trend. So, for example, when asked to describe data, you simply have to report whatever the numbers are in a period or a country that is asked for in the prompt. But if asked to describe a trend, then you are being asked to say if something is increasing or decreasing, such as voter turnout, for example. So are you simply being asked to describe voter turnout in a given country in a given year? Or are you being asked to describe a trend, which would say an increase or a decrease in voter turnout? You're also going to be asked to explain the patterns in the trends and to draw conclusions, which means you need to be able to say that you know why voter turnout has increased or decreased, connecting it to what you have learned about our course countries. I would hope that most of you can already describe data or a trend in a chart if presented with that, but to be able to explain that and draw meaningful conclusions means you have studied the countries. So you know, for example, that maybe there was a military coup in a country that affected voter turnout at a given point. And finally, you might also be asked to explain limitations of the data provided. We like to rely on statistics as scientists, but statistics is an imperfect science. There are many limitations to data. For example, it could be the way in which the data was collected. Perhaps also if we are asking opinions of citizens in an authoritarian regime, they are not willing to speak as freely. Always consider the source also when describing limitations of the data. This was one that students could find a bit tricky because it goes beyond just having to be able to read a table and chart, which you should already be able to do, but connecting that to what you've learned about the course countries. Similarly, the next disciplinary practice is source analysis, and this can also be a tricky one and one that we will practice a lot. You'll be using text-based sources, so here it's qualitative data, typically news articles, but also scientific reports, and you will be asked to read, analyze, and interpret these sources. We will practice doing this in our course through close reading and annotation, so I will give you points you need to identify within an article. And the first of those will often be asking you to describe the author's claim, perspective, evidence, and reasoning. So I will have you working with an article with a highlighter, and you need to highlight what is the author claiming? What are they saying? And then later you will learn to describe that in your own words. What is their perspective? What evidence are they giving for the perspective? And then you need to explain how their argument relates to political systems and principles. So obviously the articles that you'll be getting are about the 6 course countries that we will be studying. And again, when you then read an author's claim, their opinion about the situation in a certain country, so for example, maybe they are doing a piece about new policy in a country, you need to explain how it relates to the political systems and institutions and principles in that country to demonstrate that you did not just understand this article, but you have a broader knowledge of what is going on in the country. And then again, you need to explain the implications of the author's argument. So let's say the author is saying that certain policies should be changed. How would that affect the political system in that country if the author's opinion were to be followed? So that is source analysis. Again, it starts with reading, it starts with annotating, and then we will slowly train you to explain the author's claim in relationship to what you know about the country and those implications. These are all skills we will build on throughout the year. And finally, our 5th disciplinary practice, which we will also be building on throughout the year, is argumentation. This basically asks you to develop an argument, a response to a prompt in an essay format. Now, I say essay format, but these typically aren't as lengthy as the essays you may have written in AP history classes, but there is a method to the madness. There is a way of structuring these answers so that you will get a well-formulated argumentative essay, as it were. I give you templates to build to it so that you learn how to structure your argument, starting with a defensible claim or thesis. That will be your response to the prompt. You're asked to respond to a certain prompt. Basically, you are asked to give your opinion about a topic. Oftentimes, it's a very general statement about political concepts, and you have to give your opinion. You will then have to support your thesis using evidence from 2 of our course countries. It's great if you have evidence from other countries, but those will not be counted. So you really need to make sure you can support whatever your thesis is with evidence from the 6 countries. That might mean sometimes that your thesis might not necessarily be what you believe, but what you can best argue based on evidence from the UK, Russia, China, Nigeria, Iran, and Mexico. So do keep that in the back of your mind when you are preparing these argumentative essays. You need to explain your evidence. This is your reasoning. You need to organize it in such a way that you link explanations to your evidence, that you say, now, I am claiming this in my thesis. I am using this piece of evidence from country A, and this supports my thesis because da-da-da-da-da. So you are justifying why it is significant to your thesis. And then finally, you will be asked to respond to the alternative perspective. You've taken one side, but you then need to learn to use refutation, concession, or rebuttal in order to respond to the opposing or alternative perspective that you could have taken. This is sort of the final sub-skill that we will develop so that you can put together a well-rounded argumentative piece on your AP exam. So, those were the 5 disciplinary practices. I hope that this has helped you understand what skills we will be developing throughout this school year as you learn about AP Comparative Government and how to prepare for that AP exam. Good luck.
Like this video. Subscribe for more lessons by Miss Mar.